Aussi, merci à la Société française des architectes pour l'invitation. Lors de cette conférence, nous allons vous présenter la production architecturale de mon père depuis les années 80 jusqu'à aujourd'hui, 12 ans que nous travaillons ensemble. Je suis désolé, on va continuer la conférence en anglais. Notre français c'est un peu limité, on peut dire.
Français. Le français, il parle très bien. Well, I started my professional life in Rio in the 70s, in the middle of the 70s. And we are living in Rio in a time of a small revolution of habits, culture, music, in cinema. It was a culture that was burning. That in that time, me and Bernardo, that you are seeing, I'm the surfer guy. I was a kind of hippie in that time, but in that time I was working in architecture a lot, and the things like bossa nova and the music are influenced a lot of people in all the countries, even in France, a lot of influence in France of music Française. And I can remember Claude Lelouch, le film Un homme, une femme, and the music, the bossa nova. It was Tom Jobim, Vinícius de Moraes, and a lot of people. And that time, the Brazilian architecture, it was in the 70s, was in two icons. It's Oscar Niemeyer and Nina Bobardi and Paulo Mendes da Rocha. But in that time, they work in a different scale of a young guy that are starting work. And the monumental construction by Oscar Niemeyer and the brutalism of Lina Bobardi is another pillar of the Brazilian modernism. The use concrete was a different language from what I was interested by that time.
So, speaking of paradise, this is Angra dos Reis. It's a bay located in the south of Rio de Janeiro. It was a new place. Until that time, no one built anything there. It was a place with 365 islands, completely virgin, without any access. So, in the 70s, they start building the Rio Santos Highway, today one of the main access to this region. So by the end of 70s, there was already a road to access this 2 hours and a half from Rio. So that was a paradise where my father started building his first ocas, you can say.
I was impressed by the culture of the Indians and the naive culture in terms of materials, in terms of volume, in terms of way of life, of the freedom. And so oca means house in the native language. And here you can see the roof using fiber from a palm tree as they did, and the same volumetry. To build this in islands, we have to create a special, our own way to do that, our own techniques. So the logs were carried by the sea to the island. Pillars and beams were numerated to facilitate the transportation and construction. In here you can see that how we are inspired by the native architecture. This is a house that I built, and this is a oca, Indian house. The column of the one of first house I did, and the main column of an oca. This is a main column of our house, and these are main columns of the oca. The oca was too dark because the Indians live inside without any light. So we created skyline to bring light to our new and modern ocas. And I use this element in another house, the palm house, that is that house. The space is completely, in terms of volume, is similar. We use native materials, natural fibers, and this is a kind of technique that we use a fiber, tie the structure, we put that in the water, these things, and when they get dry, they get very thick. So we put like a structure material. We don't use nothing, only that. And here is the interior of the oca. Is more or less the same thing. And here is the interior of this oca, modern oca, that is a kind of loft. This oca, for me, became a natural loft house, but in this case, without windows. So sometimes we to live like a native, to have the same sense, we need to be impacted for the nature. While we still use organic materials and reforestation woods, because it was the thing that I get in the nature. So we began to practicing sustainable architecture, because there's no way to do the other things different than that. We have to develop this kind of details in wood for don't use metals, because metals was easily damaged. This piassava roof made of palm tree is another organic material used in that area. The concept of mimicry, of making the house disappear, which we are going to talk about later, was already part of my formation and experience. We try to disappear the things in all the time in the middle of very beautiful places.
So speaking about the environment, this is a cavaco house built 30 years ago by my father. So he took the natural topography as a guideline to the construction, and we keep this in mind until today. Without straight lines, the form of this house recreates the outlines of the hill, filling the space open previously by an aggressive cut in the hillside. And then he restored the original curve of the island with the architecture. So this house was constructed entirely in concrete, yet required a lot of calculations, very difficult to construct in an island, and even to support the grass roof. So here's the mimicry of the house using the grass and curved lines, still in Angra dos Reis. So now, please.
Now I try to use a steel structure to give the house a lighter look. I was trying all the time to get transparency and integration. Under this garden, in the next photo, there's an umbrella. There is a big auditorium and studio because the guy, the client, was the filmmaker, very famous. And so I started to use underground construction. It started to begin deeply in make the architecture disappear. Different from the concrete, which work with the form and plastic, our intention was to put the environment inside the house. There is no hierarchy between the living room and veranda, and the integration is the environment was total. And it's like a really tropical loft. And the light goes inside, like this project that is built for a German guy that lives in that time in Rio. He wanted to wake up with the sun, like the birds. And it's a question of exaggerated the light to be in all the time inside the house. The search for it was not only ours, but it was from the customers, fascinated for the light in Rio and the freedom in Rio in that time. The German guy now is playing samba very well. He becomes a Brazilian. And this is a question of to work with these clients very, very strong. We make a very special relationship between architect and client. And this is other house that was my version of a high-tech cabana that also need a special client. Here we are experimenting with the plastic membrane on the roof. There is a paper and the wood that you can see in upstairs. That is like a lanterna, Japanese lanterna, and the spaces are completely transparent. And we try to make the house as fragile as possible and with special features. It's a same feeling of the same space, but with a little ethereal sensation. You can distinguish between what is roof or what is structure and the light inside. Of course, you need a very special client for do that. Although the house was all white, it was warmed by this wood and paper ceiling. That at night it works all these papers when the light is on, like a Japanese lanterna and reflecting in the water. So this is an analogy with a recent project that has the same approach regarding proportions and speciality. Here we are prioritizing the connection between spaces. Again, a walkway in a double height ceiling. So the connection between the exterior and the interior still looks as a sensorial architecture. And this project began 6 years ago. Again, same approach of first project my father did. Same place also, an island in Angra dos Reis. So this long form and implantation provides experiences with the sea and with the forest. Internal view of the house. We put a garden inside, separating dining and living room. The long eaves, they are not just an aesthetic element. They are very
important, as you know, in a tropical weather with lots of sun, rain, and warm temperature. It's a very recognizable element in our architecture, in every project. So this is the element connecting the house with the sea, with the front view. And then same element connecting to the forest. That's the back part of the house.
And we're still using the talk.
Oh, sorry.
So, okay.
Okay.
This is a house in Tacaré, Bahia, in a big cocoa farm. Cocoa is very small tree that lives and grow above the big trees. So it's fantastic. It's very beautiful, and we were concerned about intervening as little as possible in the land. The relationship between nature was so intense that we wanted it to be part of the house. This image has an animation that the water comes inside the house, but it's
just a picture, not a movie.
It's not moving, and or even
oh, it's moving.
It's moving. Okay. So you have all the time this relationship very intense, or even continuation. The house in the view, we try to have the view and like a continuation of the house. Passou esse? Yeah. Even 10 years later, we continue with using the same reference as used for the orchard, but always modernizing the concept and materials. And no way, Bernardo.
So with all that background, that's what I was before beginning the architecture school. I made a 4-month trip to the Amazon, trying to understand how the native lives and the way they can live in a big house all together. So that the big guy is me. So 4 friends and I, we drove 17,000 kilometers from Rio to Xingu National Park, where they can live in a preserved area, restricted area. This is where I stayed for some days. Bigoka. So by the time I was in school, I already had the desire to contribute to my father's production. So I attempted too many courses of sustainable architecture, permaculture techniques, in eco-villas in different parts of Brazil. The same year I graduated from architecture school, I went here to Paris to work with Christian de Park on this project to be built in Rio, La Cité des Arts. And a few months after, I got a job at Shigeru Ban temporary office on the top of Pompidou by that time. He had just won the competition to build the Centre Pompidou in Metz. This is my father paying me a visit here in Paris. And 1 year after working in Paris, I was called to join the Tokyo office. And there, as you can see, I understand what was to work hard. That's Ban's house. That's my job there. And again, this is my father paying me a visit in Japan. We made an architectural tour around lots of places and contemporary works. And then he asked me to join the office, and then I came back to Rio and started working together.
This is a traditional villa in Kyoto that we visited. Since I was young, I was impressed by the Japanese architecture and the similarities with the architecture that I was doing. We found similarities from there and our approach to the environment. The principle of Ingawa, translated to us as the borderline between nature and architecture, inside and outside, without limits, and the circulation. You change the place that you are to another place, you have to pass through a very beautiful place, and we are walking during the way. And with the arrival of Bernardo, this relationship with Japanese architecture intensified. The plans become more simple and fluid. The open space become more important than the closed space.
This is another project. As we say, that's when the Brazilian and Japanese architecture, they have the same intentions. This is a living room of a house in São Paulo. So the idea here is that the transparencies creates no limits from interior and exterior again. Again, the big eaves, common in Oriental and tropical architecture. In 2008, we started using laminated timber as structure. So for us, that was the future in terms of structure. We didn't have this technique before in Brazil. It was sustainable, it was beautiful, it was light.
Strong.
And strong. It was more or less the mix between the timber structure and the steel structure that we were used to work with. So the same volume of the old ochre houses my father did, but now using pinus and eucalyptus tree from environment friendly forests and farms. Those last three slides are from the same house in Búzios, famous fisherman villa discovered by Brigitte Bardot.
And this is another beach house in the middle of the forest, the rainforest, very common in Brazil. So what we need was transparency and big eaves of 4 meters, and wind passes through the house. It's very hot, so the circulation is very important. This is a dining room and a bedroom of this house. This structure, this wood is structural.
Yeah.
And so we make a structure, and we ever try no cover the structure, even in the metal house, the concrete house, and the wood house. We build and it's already done.
So more recently, the OS house, where we use steel structure together with the laminated timber structure. So the structure with 4 meters overhead is protecting the facade of the rooms. and also on the other side is connecting the circulation with the garden. By night it looks like this Japanese lantern. So again, we made the structure play the whole of our facade and the interior finishings, as my father just said.
And we try to use also the wood, the stone is from Brazil, the wood is from Brazil. Try to use Brazilian things, still trying. Huh?
So we found out that that kind of technique, it was a cool way to avoid big glass panels and still have the transparency, the connection to the outside. Again, trying to hide the architecture on the nature. It's a big house, difficult to hide, but again, trying to have this mimicry.
Now we come with another great desire of ours, is that we talked about 5 minutes ago, which is to make the architecture invisible. We call it like topography architecture. This was the house that I designed in 19th, with the water in the ceiling, and all the time trying to make the architecture disappear. In this case, is to mix the water in the roof and the water from the sea, and take advantage of that lightness and freshness. Or a green roof in that house. As you notice, those are big houses. So we try to reduce the visual size of their impact of the environment. And all the time trying to make, trying to construct the land, because the land's always very, como fala em steep. And so we created outdoor area, building a lower floor. Very common way of implementation in these sloping areas in Rio. So there is many rooms above, and we try to make to catch other effects. So this is the bottom of the swimming pool that try to get the light from the sun. That is. Sorry, my English. We worked a lot on the interiors. This make the work a complete job. We had control of the project as a whole.
So this is another way to make the construction less visible, to turn the facades into a very dark shadow, using, in this case, black wood. It's a Japanese technique called soshiban. It consists on burning the outer part of the timber, creating a dead skin that protects the wood and without maintenance in the future. So no worries with sun and rain in tropical weather. That's another beach house 2 hours from São Paulo. Again, standing in the middle of the forest, the steep terrain. Again, bedrooms under and social areas on the top.
And it's using steel also.
Steel structure, yeah.
Yeah.
That's the house and the site. The main entrance, car parking. The main door. There you can see the
Burning
stairs.
wood,
So in Brazil, we feel that we need lots of outdoor areas as much as possible. The idea is to turn the social area in a veranda, a true veranda. So because of the slope, we put the social areas connected to the terrace and pool on the top also. And then the bedrooms underneath, on the lower floor. So here we have the lights more controlled than on the top. Those are all openable doors.
This is a 2 floors beach house, minimizing the impact of the environment. We tried to make it looks like only 1 floor house, only the ground floor. To do that, we put the house 2 meters higher, creating space above it for service, gym, home theater, still having natural light and ventilation. This picture shows the stair with the natural light coming from the ceiling. So the other spaces downstairs, you have to use these stairs. Again, trying to make the construction look smaller. The closet space form 2 separate blocks, and circulation are in the middle, with the light goes through the wood trellis.
So now another subject which is very important to us, probably because of the tropical weather, which is the roof, the shelter. So differently from what we spoke before about making the architecture disappear, sometimes we try to emphasize that element, the roof. Here it is covering the whole living area, giving visibility to the project. Then this is the same project. So we created this high ceiling volumes with big eaves or overhangs for social areas, and turn the bedrooms or the intimate spaces into a more discrete volumes. As you can see, this dark, thin volume there. That's the same country area of the last project, a few hours from São Paulo. It's a weekend place for them. It's a very hot place. Again, we see the living room, the dining, and terrace all together, sheltered by this roof. Another project with the pitched roof, sheltering the social areas. And the bedrooms in a more silent way, protected, more quiet. So in this project we used big stone walls to mark the axis of the project and also the circulations of the house. Here trying to blur the boundaries between the garden and the architecture. There are lots of spaces behind that big wall. That's, if you don't know it, you never know that they exist. Becoming part of the natural site.
Again, a pitched roof sheltering all social areas of the house. The bedrooms are placed on that curtain steel box in the, without eaves, yes. Here, the dynamics of the house, the contrast of the volumes to get a strong feeling for this inclinated roof. The dark block with the flat roof and overhang and no overhang give emphasis to the openness created by the roof. This is our tropical Ingawa, the Japanese sense of circulations. This is the entrance. You enter in the house by the garden. And standing the roof for outside to the exterior connects the inside to the exterior and give the appearance of no limits of the spaces. And created verandas. That is very important for the Brazilian people because the weather is too hot. This is the entrance of another country house where the roof plays the main role, minimizing the height of the construction. The entrance is downstairs, so there is a big stair that you reach the one pavement house only. In this case, a big flat roof. All the things of the services, the kitchens, etc., is in the stone box. This is from the garden. It looks like a very transparent ground for a house. So you can see that we always try to make the wind circulation through the house. It's the 4 meters overhang created shadows on the facade, turning the inside things like bedrooms and living rooms very, very not so hot. And protection to the sun and the rain. The houses, the maintaining this house is more easier for if you don't have overhangs, because no water, no sun in the facade. This is a view from the pool behind that stone wall. Behind that stone wall are placed all the services of the house and other things, like a spa and sauna, other things like social things.
So now we move to a specific period of time in Rio, which will show projects designed shortly before the 2014 World Cup and the 2016 Olympic Games. Many of them as part of competition process that before that we were not used to have in Brazil. So big projects were going on with lots of investment from private and public institutions. Brazil was in fashion by the time. As you probably know, the situation is not like that anymore. With the big crisis, we emerged, and hopefully we will get better soon. Don't know, with the new president. So in 2009, we participated in a competition of the Museum of Image and Sound in Copacabana Beach. That was our proposal. We based our work on stones of Rio. It was a way of making graphical these hillside geological references. There you can see the Copacabana hills hidden behind the buildings. We wanted them to appear a little bit more. You can see the favelas there. So that was our approach, to integrate the museum with the city. Here we tried to translate the geometry of the stones. So we based our concept design on the work of Eliot Sica, a famous artist, Carioca artist of the neo-concrete period. Specifically his series of meta schemes. There we see a lot of physical models we did with soup to arrive at the final form. It's the main entrance. So with the irregular forms, we try to focus the openings on different and unexpected views from the city and focusing on urban icons that we can see from there. Relationship with the exterior again. This is the physical model showing the floors. We didn't win this competition, but it kind of they opened some doors for us for public projects that we'll see here.
In the same time, in the same year, we worked hard to design a temporary structure for a 5 days music festival in Rio, for the open of the works in the city. The deal with the limited budget, we found out that renting old containers was very cheap comparing to the other type of structures because of the proximity to the harbor area. Containers were put together like a chess table, creating voids that we used for performance and projection. It was 320 containers that we used.
So this is the global headquarters, the biggest communication group of Latin America, including newspapers, television, and radio networks. This period of time before the World Cup and Olympic Games represented big modifications in the city, including investments on public transport and the revitalization of the harbor area. So that was the concept of the facade, referring to the half-tone technique. Here we see the openings that works irregularly as the newspaper impression. Again, the wish to bring nature to the project, even in a corporate project, corporate architecture. That's another competition in the harbor area. This time a mixed-use master plan, housing and commercial, business and hotel. They would be ready for the Olympic Games and would be used as accommodation for athletes, referees, staff, journalists, etc. Hundreds of thousands of square meters. Again, we use the mountains and rocks of Rio as an inspiration for our proposal, the shapes and forests. Again, the irregular and non-linear design of traditional favelas, the poor areas that was occupying the hills of Rio. So there, far behind, you see the mountains. making part of the city. So we wanted as much as possible to do suspended gardens and parks, organic forms, a lot of greens. We didn't want to make a collection of high-rise buildings, as most proposals were based on, because of the immense quantity of square meters they asked us. So the idea was to create a new mountain, a new relief on that area.
In this physical model, where we studied the volumetry.
It's another project for the Olympic Games. That's the Olympic golf clubhouse and amenities in Barra da Tijuca, another area of Rio. It was to be built in a flooded land between the beach and the mountains, full of mangroves and sand dunes. Again, the roof making part of the ground and vice versa. So people would be able to use the green roof as long as they don't play any golf from there. So speaking of the use of the roof, that's the proposal for the Maritime Museum, also a part of the harbor area redevelopment. This is to be built in an old pier owned by the Brazilian Marine. That's the old city. We didn't want to lose the main characteristics of the pier in the city, which was an open space that you can literally walk over the water. Here we see the old frigate owned by Dom Pedro, King of Portugal and Brazil by the time. Interaction with the city. Interaction with the sea. So here, people would be able to enter on a big marine ship anchored next to the building, also a submarine. As you can see, we used cotton steel on the facades, which is a common material for ships and boats. That way, the idea was that we could use engineers and workers from the marine. This project is waiting for some approvals. We hope it is will still be done.
This is the first project to be built in the harbor area of Rio, and is part of the preparation for the big events. The Museum of Rio, also called Mar, that means sea in Portuguese, started in 2010 and finished in 2013.
The two existing buildings that we were asked to renovate and create an urban mark for the new harbor area. One with late eclectic architecture and the other an early modernist. The modernist building was in a very bad condition with structural problems. So we put down 2 floors and changed the facade for a lighter one.
So the connection was done through the big and fluid roof that covered both buildings, both buildings, and area passage from one building to the other, And this is the entrance of the museum.
Here's a diagram showing the main circulation. People would get in through the space between the buildings, creating an open and curved foyer. They go to the top of the modernist building on a curved plaza, offering unexpected views from the old city and the bay. From that plaza, the visitor gets the walkway and goes to the higher floor of the eclectic building, where they start to see the exhibitions until they reach the ground floor. On the modernist building, there is educational rooms, administration, auditorium, staff,
School.
Yeah.
And this is not modernism more, because it was modernism. It's, we changed.
We used to call it modernism.
Yeah, we used to call, but we change. We cut 2 floors and take out all the things, and one thing that stay is only the structure pillars. We use a recycled glass to cover the new construction, to get light to the interior. This is a mix between the 2 styles completely. It's very nice for me. It's also a fluid staircase from the suspended plaza. The plaza is under the fluid roof. The old city, seen from the terrace. It was a plane that connected to make a rebuild of this area and connect to this area to the plaza by the train suspended. But they didn't do. This is the fluid, the roof over the new building. And over the preserved building, it's over the preserved building that we make a reform, total reform also. The design of this roof was only possible by the use of 3D modeling, using liquid surface that can be freezed. We did that in German, the calculations for do that. Make a reference to the Sea of Rio, as the name of the museum suggested.
So this is the last part of this conference. We will show some recent projects in Brazil or abroad. As you know, it takes a lot of time to finish a project, sometimes more than 5 years. This is our first high-rise building in São Paulo. It's under construction right now. Here, featuring wood and brise soleils and eaves to give the sensation of a house, as a house we are used to design. This is in a small Caribbean island. At this moment we are designing 2 resorts for this Aman flagship. This one is in Caribbean. Guest pavilion. Here, the master plan of the island. So this is another Aman resort, but in the north part of Brazil. The spa with more than 13,000 square meters, huge construction that we fragmented on small blocks to have the nature playing the main role. The bungalows. Another project in a tropical island, this way in Fiji, a very big villa. View from the sea. This is in Bahia, a private house. Construction site last week. This is in Australia, in Melbourne. It's a house that they just finished this year.
They are moving. I think so.
They are moving right now, yeah. That's the Doha house in Qatar, designed for one of the most important sheikhs here. The idea was to make the 13,000 square meters that was required for us to look as a movement on the sand, as dunes. So we kind of drop these two boomerangs that grows from the ground, creating internal areas full of light and green. So kind of creating an oasis for the clients. And looking from far, it would disappear. It's the Google Earth yesterday. It's a house in Portugal, in Tavira, on the Algarve area. Finally, the last project of the presentation, the DE house in Belgium. Here, sorry.
And as you see, people from different parts of the world are looking for the same transparencies, same organic materials, and same approach to the nature. So we can do that in, I think, with the new techniques of engineer in all the places in the world. And finish.
If you want to make any questions or comment, you can do it in French. We can understand, not talk so.